Hello there guys, what is going on? Daniel Childs back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Friday. Nearly at the weekend, another day closer to Christmas, another day closer to the return of Chelsea. Not sure how positive people are about the return of Chelsea. I've seen mixed responses. In today's news video, we're going to sort of talk about strikers once again because they have kind of dominated the conversation this week regarding Armando Broja, the links to Moukoko from Borussia Dortmund, yesterday for Fofana, who looks like he will be signing for Chelsea in January. But today I'm going to be reacting to some of your responses to a tweet I put out around Chelsea striker targets and who you would like to sign in January. Some of the names we haven't really focused on so far this week. That'll be interesting. The Club World Cup, which is obviously going to impact Chelsea, the new plans that were announced by FIFA today, and then also Cesare Casadei, the youngster signed from Inter Milan, and potential plans for him in January coming up. That's another point I want to touch on today. Before we do get into any of that good stuff, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are getting closer, over halfway now to that goal of 30k subscribers. It'd be incredible. I know there's a short time now to reach that goal by the end of 2023, but please do help out. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell for regular Chelsea content, and if you are enjoying the content ahead of Christmas, hit that like button because it spreads the Christmas cheer. I truly believe it does. That's the way to do it. Just hit the like button. Let's get into it firstly with strikers, and I think that, you know, as I say, we've mentioned a lot of names this week, and I know a lot of people, I have seen this recurring in my comments about central midfield. I say this all the time. You know my thoughts on central midfield. I still do think out of like priority, it is top. It is beyond the striker for me, because although Broja's injury is a knock, it really is, and it's a shame, and it limits Chelsea's options. I still think Chelsea and Graham Potter can get around that. Do you promote Malik Mothersill from the academy? Do you sort of shift players more centrally in the squad to that role? You know, I think there are ways Chelsea can get around it. And I also do think it's the responsibility of both Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Kai Havertz to perform better in the second half of the season. That doesn't mean Chelsea, you know, we could see Fofana become that player, who, of course, it looks like Chelsea are going to sign. He may just become that player in the second half of the season, or Chelsea could go out and sign someone else. So we've been through a lot of the targets that have been reported. Let's go through some names here. As you can see, my tweet, what strikers should Chelsea buy in January? Tweeted this earlier in the week. Let's go through some of the responses. Jay here, who's got his own YouTube channel, please go and follow his work. I've done collabs with him in the past. Tweets Lukaku. Probably the most unpopular name that you could bring out, even though he is still contracted to Chelsea. I know this was brought up in terms of like compared to Ronaldo, and also the fact that it could be an emergency situation. There's no Thomas Tuchel anymore, so in some ways it gives weight to that argument, but I just don't. I've been writing actually today for Football London a sort of 2022 in review piece. I'm going to go through each month and sort of review what's going on, and obviously it starts in January with Lukaku's interview, and it just sort of takes you back to that period, and just I think should remind you, just go back and sort of think about that period and the way people feel about Lukaku. Anytime you speak about him now as a Chelsea fan, he's kind of at points during this year, even saying his name is kind of like Harry Potter, you know, he who should not be named. It's gotten that bad for Lukaku, and I just think for the player, for the club, I've said this before, it's an unhealthy situation to go back to that, and I think that boat has sailed really, unfortunately, even though I was a fan of the player, and I still think he will probably score goals for Inter Milan when he gets back to fitness. I don't think he'll be coming back to Chelsea, and I don't think that's the best move. Another one here, that was Mitrovic was mentioned a number of times. Alexander Mitrovic from Fulham, of course, was at the World Cup and scored a couple goals for Serbia. I've liked Mitrovic for a long time. I think he's almost like the poor man's Diego Costa. I really do. I think there's a lot of attributes about him that I like. And the good thing about him this season is he's proving that he can score goals in the Premier League. That's always been one of his big criticisms, you know, from people, is that he's amazing in the Championship. He's always been amazing in the Championship, but when he has to make that step up and really lead a team who have to survive, he hasn't been able to do it. You know, I think this is absolutely maybe one Chelsea could explore. I guess, you know, it's always that thing of, you know, you sign that player from mid-table, looking at his age as well. What is the long-term value of Mitrovic at Chelsea? But I like his fire. I like his you know, skullduggery on the pitch, really. I of course like that side to him as well, but he's had a real quality to him and would add a more focal physical presence that Chelsea clearly don't have. Osimhen or Memphis Depay? We spoke about Memphis Depay yesterday. I think Memphis Depay would be a really exciting signing. And as well, you're not kind of limited then that you have to play him as a central striker. He can play maybe a little bit wider, a little bit deeper if you want him to, and I think could link up with other players quite well. And there were quite a few people who wanted to see Chelsea go in for him from Barcelona rather than Aubameyang, and that could be a possibility in January. I mean, Cesare Casadei was reporting it yesterday, and I think for the type of football that Graham Potter wants to play, I think the idea of going into different formations, the 4-2-2-2, I think Memphis Depay fits into that role. You want to play a 4-3-3, I think the possession style, the way he's developed as a player in tight spaces, especially, and what Chelsea lack technically at times, especially from wider areas, but also in central areas too. I think Depay, Osimhen, I think is a no-go. I don't think he'll be moving from Napoli given their incredible starts of the season in Serie A until the summer, I think. And it's going to take a lot to get Osimhen out of Napoli when that does happen. Stanley here says, and once again, a number of people have brought this up, Ivan Toney, another Premier League striker, of course, is under investigation at the moment by the FA, and that obviously rocked, I think, his World Cup plans and his reputation. We have to see how that resolves itself. But I think as a player, Ivan Toney has proven to be a really, really good striker. And I've said this before about, in the Championship, I think his talent and goal scoring, consistent goal scoring for Brentford was kind of dismissed because it's the Championship. But he's come up to the Premier League and he's scored a lot of goals. And, before that investigation thing came out, I think a lot of people were bemused that he was not in Gareth Southgate's squad for the World Cup. And just, as I say, technically, I think for what he's brought to Brentford, for the quality he's shown on a regular basis, for, he obviously has that physical presence to him. He can be a focal point, but as well, I mean, from the penalty spot, if we're worried about, say, losing Jorginho, who's been our kind of main penalty taker, you've got one there, one of the best in world football, undeniably, in terms of his record. And again, just Premier League ready, I think that there is a value to that, especially halfway through the season. If you bring in a player that knows the league very well, I think that's even more important because it's such a precarious situation at times, bringing in players halfway through the season, and Chelsea know that very well, and you'd have someone there who would know the league. But I think you would, again, have to pay quite a sizable fee to get him out of Brentford, because I think that is the guy who's going to keep them safe for another season. Once again, I could see Toney moving eventually. It's who of the bigger clubs, if they do take that jump, and obviously with the investigation we'll have to see how that impacts his career in the long term. Baseman 93, this is the last one here, and another one that that I'm probably favourable to is Tammy Abraham. It hasn't been the best year for Tammy compared to last season. I think he had a really good year last year for Roma. Hasn't really worked out the same way. He's not been in great form, and that obviously I think cost him a place for England. I mean, you could argue that Gareth Southgate isn't the most favourable to players who play outside the Premier League, particularly to Serie A players. But Fikayo Tomori has struggled with form, but Tammy Abraham probably would have seen himself as in line to get into that England squad, and unfortunately fell behind the likes of Callum Wilson, who's had a good start to the season. So I like Tammy, I really do, and I still think it's an error that Chelsea sold him. I do. I firmly believe that. I think it was one of Thomas Tuchel's worst mistakes as Chelsea's head coach, and I still stand by that. Just because of the lack of goals Chelsea have had, I think Tammy Abraham was really undermined, underrated at Chelsea for a young striker, and what he was able to do. And then, it was always my big thing once Tammy left is who is replacing his goals. And if it was always, whenever anyone demeaned Tammy Abraham, I was like, okay, if you are demeaning Tammy Abraham, then the comparison, if we go to the comparison of, say, Lukaku struggles last season, or Timo Werner struggle, or Kai Havertz struggles, or what we're seeing so far this season, where Aubameyang started well, but, hasn't replicated that since. It's a bit like Olivier Giroud, isn't it? If you're not replacing those players, then you've got a big problem. If you allow goals to walk out the door, and you allow someone who I think was developing and getting better, and I do think Tammy's quality will shine through in the second half of the season. I really do. I think that he'll start scoring goals again because he just has that natural instinct. And listen, breaking news, everyone, goals matter, and I think Tammy Abraham just has proven throughout his career at different levels that he can do that. There are ways for his game to absolutely improve, but I've never bought the idea that he was never good enough for Chelsea, because compared to what he was competing with, I think he was pretty satisfactory, even very decent for Chelsea. But again, we've maybe got that buyback coming into effect in 2023. Not quite sure, and it is also down to the player. I mean, what does Tammy want? Does he want to come back to Chelsea? Does he think that maybe there's another path for him? But he has consistently been asked about returning to the Premier League, and I'd be very happy to see Tammy Abraham return to Chelsea at some point. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Who would you like to see Chelsea sign? Or, as I say, do you think Chelsea can go by without signing a striker, another striker? If we assume that Fofana is going to sign and he's going to be the player to come in, is it worth going out there again? Let me know in the comments below. But let's get into some other news quickly here before we wrap up. Infantino obviously gave his second press conference of the World Cup earlier today. It wasn't as disastrous, but there was still some bad news. He was confirming that the new Men's Club World Cup will take place in 2025 and will feature 32 teams. The 32-team tournament will go ahead, making it like a World Cup. So more teams, more games, and I believe Chelsea are going to be involved in that one because this has been actually rumoured, and I remember speaking about this on a news video on the channel maybe as far back as 2020. It's been touted for some time. You know, Chelsea won the Europa League, we won the Champions League, we won the last Club World Cup, so we're likely to be involved in this 32-team tournament. My big thing, and Mateo Kovacic, and I wrote a piece that I'll link below from Football London today. Mateo Kovacic was speaking about how players are exhausted. I'll put the quote up now on screen. As you can see, we are exhausted. Many of us will be exhausted when we come back to our clubs. But this is what we love, and we will come back, rest, and then focus on the next 6 months for our clubs. Obviously, Kovacic got to the semi-final with Croatia, and it's such a short turnover. You know, the players are going back into a very intense Premier League schedule for Chelsea. It's demanding in terms of performances and results, and we're going to be relying on a lot of the players who have been at the World Cup. And we've seen increased injury, particularly at Chelsea. The congested schedule already was there because of the World Cup. We've had postponed games due to the Queen passing away in September. Chelsea could still go far in the FA Cup. We could still go far in the Champions League. Beyond that, you've got all the international breaks in 2023 to mix into that pot as well. And I just think it's ridiculous. I really do. And I just don't see how more fixtures, more games across the sport is going to improve it. I just don't at the elite level. I just don't see the evidence behind that, because I think we see more injuries. I think we see dips in form, and then fans wonder why players struggle over the course of a season, maybe don't develop in the way they want them to because of those demands. I think we see so many players who are just either dealing with injury for lots of their career, or you know, as I say, are just so shattered by certain periods of the season that we don't see their best football. And I just don't think this Club World Cup, I think the Club World Cup was fine as it was. I don't think you need to make it into another tournament. We've already got enough tournaments, no matter what the smugness of Arsene Wenger wants to keep saying. You know, I don't know how this improves things, and I would hope the players would have more of a stand up and sort of say about this, because I think Thibaut Courtois was the most prominent player to speak about it. Gareth Bale was talking about how many games he was going to end up playing. I think Declan Rice as well, and I don't think it's going to benefit football and players at the elite level in the best way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Another small thing here from The Athletic: Chelsea will receive approximately 2.3 million from FIFA for their players competing at the World Cup. And the final thing here, Cesare Casadei is being earmarked for a possible loan move in January. This is also via The Athletic. Casadei, of course, scored that incredible goal against Peterborough. He was involved against Aston Villa last week, came off the bench, and like Omari Hutchinson, was signed in the summer as one of these really exciting youngsters that Chelsea heavily invested in. And I think, you know, the next step for him is some senior football. I don't think this is the worst idea. You know, I think that he is clearly a player that Chelsea wanted to get into the academy, get used to the academy. But it is always that next step of how do you make that progression? How do you get that experience? And there are some, like Omari Hutchinson, I've already said this week, that I'd like to see feature in the first team. I think I'd like to keep him around. Casadei is a midfielder, you know, and Chelsea have lacked a sense of aggression. I know some people were pointing out his physique when Chelsea were training in Abu Dhabi and saying we don't have many of those players, but I still think for his own personal development, if they can get the right loan, I always think the Championship is just a really good place for players of his age to go. It's not, listen, I'm not saying that you only limit it to the Championship, but I think that league is just so demanding and physical, but also of a technical ability that I think actually translates quite well to the Premier League, as we've seen with players that have come through Chelsea's academy in recent years. So maybe there, maybe elsewhere, maybe in Europe, we'll see how that plays out. But I think Casadei is one that I would be sending out loan. Maybe Dion Rankin as well is another player who I've been really excited by in the academy. I think probably is getting close to that period now of getting a loan. I think he's 20 years old. Hutchinson would be one I'd keep, just like Lewis Hall, obviously now part of the first team squad. Mothersill, we'll see how that develops. Simon Johnson did a piece for The Athletic about him that I think you should go and read. But let me know your opinions, because I think there's a lot of excitement around these youngsters. Charlie Webster, another one who probably is being earmarked for a loan. I remember him being linked in the summer as well, and probably needs to make that next step sooner rather than later, or may just get a promotion into the first team. We will see as things develop under Graham Potter. But that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch it. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.